Hey guys, my name is James Palmer.
Hi, I'm Christina Mallory.
Hi, I'm Katie Greger.
I'm Ricky Hernandez. So we're just having our preliminary conversation before we go out and interview actual students on Duke's campus. And we just wanted to have an open discussion and talk about the different questions we might ask and how we can relate them back to the goal of this project. And I think what we're all hoping to achieve from this project is basically like to spark discussion on campus, to bring about awareness, and to apply the different concepts we've learned in class back to Duke University particularly.
Exactly.
I think that what we all can agree on is that this class has definitely been a discussion, has provoked discussion, and what it has done, at least for me, has sort of gotten me to question a lot of the things that I've always held to be true.
And grown up knowing, certainly, and learning in the school system in America as well, especially about these people.
Oh, I feel like we can use like our backgrounds and some of the things that we've learned in our different fields of study to like focus questions about different things that we've learned and like how they apply to Duke specifically, because it's like where we are every day and it's our own like mini social setting.
Yeah, I agree.
True.
Do we just want to take a second to maybe say like one thing that we personally took away from the class?
Sure,
Yeah,
why
like
not?
what you were hoping to learn in the class, and then how you saw a transformation throughout.
Oh, that
Sure.
could work too.
I was sort of expecting to be more of a history class, more of like learning like, oh, the Aztecs, like the empire started now, it ended when the Spanish came in 1519.
Yeah.
Right.
But it ended up being a lot more about sort of getting me to question that framework and look at it again. So I know like one thing that I was particularly struck by was the definition of history and how it can be written a certain way or interpreted a certain way, and no matter, despite the fact that we view it as like a set group of facts, regardless, it's always very subjective. And I know we talked about how, like the Aztecs, for instance, they didn't have a set alphabet that could be read the same way each time it was read. It was sort of a series of symbols and pictures that each time a priest would read it and it'd be a different interpretation. And the Spanish looked down on that. And a lot of times we sort of view history as being written and like everyone gets the same thing out of what they read.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Very
Whereas
Western.
in reality, one person can read the same thing as someone else reads and take a completely different thing away from it. And also when you write things down, it's like what you decide to include. So that can be completely subjective as well. So
Yeah.
Right, I think that was pretty important too, especially when we were kind of doing that unit on history where we looked at their language, and I watched that video they talked about the hieroglyphs and how they eventually came to realize that it was a combination, like many different symbols could stand for the same letter, like depending on how someone was feeling during that day, which is a completely different system of writing. An A is always an A in our culture, so like that's really kind of interesting the way they express themselves. I think it really speaks to like the fluidity that we saw in their culture.
Yeah, and I think like especially like being at university, there's this mentality that like if something's written down and it's been, quote, proven, then like
It's
it is
true.
fact and it is
Mhm.
true and
Yeah.
like it's set in stone. And like I don't know, that's something that I've started to like really question since learning about what you just talked about.
I definitely think it comes down to sort of our obsession with, right answer and wrong answer. And I think a lot of what we've been learning to do in this class is sort of been more to provoke discussion and sort of question what we take to be true.
Yeah.
Right, which is very different than, you're right, what I thought we were going to do coming in. I was like, oh, I'm going to learn about, human sacrifice and how they lived a little bit more than I did in school, but I actually learned a completely different set of ideas and philosophies than I learned growing up at all. I mean, we hardly learned about any of this going through the school system, and then to like actually think about these people and their lives and that like impact on the world is a completely different thing than I thought was going to happen.
Yeah, like I thought of history as being like so black and white before this class, like facts, events, this is what happened. But this class, I feel like we learned like a new way to even read history and learn about history, because now I like can't read something without thinking about all the different things that went into it, like who wrote it, what was going on,
Yeah.
like who subjectively wrote this, like the context.
Right.
So I think if I was reading history before this class and after this class, it's like totally a different way of
I
reading
think
it.
any subject that we study here can kind of like we can sort of like apply that questioning to it. And I think like anything that like any class that I'll take from now on, I feel like I can sort of like use that questioning mindset, sort of be like, oh, like this was written by this person this way for this reason. And I think it's all a lot more subjective than I previously had thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would agree with that.
So I feel like we can like introductorily ask like people on campus how they feel about like the history history of the indigenous people and stuff, just to kind of get their mindset of probably where we were a couple months ago.
Right, I bet they
Just
didn't
to
think
see.
anything about this. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure no one can really considers it.
Yeah, I think even just like questioning also what it means to be indigenous in the first place. Like, I think that'd be a great question to ask people. How would you define indigenous?
That was the first day,
Like,
wasn't
we
it?
were on the
And I
first
didn't
day?
even think
Yeah.
about, I was like, indigenous, you're just from that place.
Yeah.
But like, what is, it's
And
so
like,
subjective.
I think a lot of people automatically go to like, for example, like South America when they think of indigenous, but like you can be indigenous anywhere, you
Right.
know?
Indigenous to France.
It's
We
like-
talked about that.
yeah.
Who are, and who's like defining indigenous, right?
Yeah.
Which I literally didn't know
And it
before this
seems
class.
so
Didn't
obvious
know.
to me now. It
Yeah.
seems so obvious to me now.
Right.
You know, and it just
But you just don't think
It
things are
wasn't.
subjective. Like, it goes like thing, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, like, indigenous. Like,
Yeah.
they live there, like, because it says on in Merriam-Webster, like,
yeah.
so weird.
But I mean, I think we're trained, you know, like we're trained to think a certain way.